Welcome, everyone. On behalf of Carthage College, I want to say how delighted I am that everyone is here. Carthage is so interested in having more community members take part in our activities, from our performances to our lectures to debates like this one. And even if you wanted to come by and just take a moment to sit in a red chair and look at the lake, we'd be happy to have you here. We're also very excited to be part of contributing to the growth and vibrancy of Kenosha and Racine and all of southeastern Wisconsin. And we're just delighted that we can hold this event in conjunction with the Kenosha News, the Journal Times of Racine, and the Lake Geneva Regional News. And I want to take this moment to thank our candidates, Randy Bryce, Bryan, Steil, and Ken Yorgan, for being with us tonight and for sharing their perspectives on a number of critical issues. My job tonight is to tell you a bit about the format of the debate and then to introduce our moderators. The format will be that each candidate will make an opening statement of 2 minutes in length, and then following that, the moderators will ask a series of questions, and each candidate will have 1 minute to answer each of those questions. And at the end, each candidate will have 2 minutes for a closing statement. The speaking order was determined by a draw that happened earlier today. I should tell you that the candidates were told the topics for the questions tonight about a week ago, but the candidates have not played a role in choosing the topics or in constructing the questions. We do ask that audience members remain silent so that other people can hear, those that are present in Siebert Chapel and those that are listening online. If there are disruptions that persist, people will be asked to leave. And on the other hand, I'm delighted to say that our candidates have all agreed that afterwards they would be happy to talk to members of the audience and answer questions. So now I'd like to introduce our 3 moderators this evening, Bob Heisse, Katherine Hilson, and Jeff Roberg. And of course, each of you, if you'd like to turn around as I talk about you, feel free. Bob Heisse is the executive editor of the Kenosha News, a position he's held since April. He's had a long career in journalism, most notably winning the McClatchy President's Award. And one of his initiatives since coming is to have the Kenosha News take a stronger role in publicizing information about state politics. And so this event is exactly in the midst of his work. So thank you, Bob. Katherine Hilson is relatively new to Carthage. She is an assistant professor of sociology and criminal justice, and her teaching and research explores the intersection of race, class, gender, crime, and social movements. So we're delighted that she could be a part of this. And then finally, our third moderator is Jeff Roberg, chair of political science and professor of political science at Carthage for quite a while. His teaching and research has been particularly concerned with human rights and environmental politics, especially in Latin America, but also in the former Soviet Union and its successor states. So with that, please join me in welcoming our candidates and our moderators.
Good evening, gentlemen. We're pleased that you are here tonight and to help our community get to know you a little bit better, so thank you very much. With that, let's begin. Mr. Yorgan, you will have the first opening statement.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for all being here tonight and sharing this evening with us, and thank you to Carthage College and to the Kenosha News for putting this event together. You guys have done a great job. I feel very welcomed and very comfortable. You know, as I traveled around the district during this campaign, I would walk up to people and I'd say, "Hi, I'm Dr. Yorgan. I'm running for Congress in this district." And they'd say, "Oh, are you a Democrat or a Republican?" I'd say, "Well, I'm an independent." They say, "Oh, great. You know, we need more independents in the Congress." I said, "Well, I couldn't agree more." Then, of course, the question is, do you expect to steal more votes from the Republicans or the Democrats? And I say, well, in as much as 40% of Americans and more self-identify as independent, it's my job to keep the Republicans and Democrats from stealing votes from us. Now, no matter who loses this election, I'm sure I'll probably be blamed. And I hope that both of you have the opportunity to blame me. When when an independent goes to Congress, I think he or she has a unique opportunity in being able to speak to both sides of the aisle. In fact, we are the aisle. And it's something that needs to be done, something that needs to break down this one-party dominance that goes back and forth, and really gets very little accomplished. So I think there are good people in the Republican side, there are good people in the Democratic side, and there may be enough of them to think and function independently and break down the dominance that the majority party has been having. One thing that I intend to do as a chiropractor is to take a treatment table into my office as a congressman, invite all my fellow congressmen to come in and have their backbone evaluated.
Mr. Steil.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank the Kenosha News, the Racine Journal-Times, the Lake Geneva Regional News, and for Carthage College for putting on tonight's event. I think what you're going to hear tonight is a great contrast in ideas. I think it's going to be a robust discussion of the direction that we want to take our country. I think that's a good discussion to have. I want to lower the cost of health care. I believe you do that by putting patients and doctors at the center of that decision-making process. Randy Bryce wants to have a government takeover of health care. That's a $32 trillion program. It would end Medicare as we know it. I believe that we need to keep our taxes low, that we need to keep more of our hard-earned money right here in southeast Wisconsin. I think that's in stark contrast to Randy Bryce. Randy Bryce would raise your taxes. He'd spend more of your hard-earned money to Washington, D.C. I believe we need to keep our communities safe. I stand with the men and women of law enforcement. I believe that's why I've earned the endorsement of all 6 sheriffs, Democrats and Republicans alike, across the 1st Congressional District. Randy Bryce would abolish ICE. His policies would make us less safe, not more safe. I think tonight you're going to hear a great contrast in ideas. What direction do we want to take our country? And I look forward to that conversation tonight, look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Carthage College for this fantastic venue. I'd also like to thank Racine Journal-Times, Kenosha News for moderating this event. Ken, great to see you here. Bryan, it's also great to see you. It was great last Friday also, seeing you answer questions and not hide behind millions of dollars worth of attack ads. I'm really looking forward to discussing the issues in front of the people tonight. Thank you.
Thank you to all 3 attending tonight. The first question, a landmark report from the UN Scientific Panel on Climate Change describes a world of worsening food shortages, wildfires and hurricanes, and a mass die-off of coral reefs as soon as 2040. Do you agree or disagree with the following statement? The climate change we are currently experiencing is in a large part due to human activity. What would you do as a representative of Congress to respond to this? Mr. Steil.
So, as an avid outdoorsman, I believe it's a key component to protect our land, our water, and our air. I believe that climate change is real, and I believe humans are a key component of that. I think then what comes is how do we actually go about protecting our climate without not dramatically increasing our energy costs. So if you look at the policies of Randy Bryce, it would dramatically increase the cost of energy. He would pull away from our ability to heat our homes with natural gas, which would dramatically increase the costs of how we actually go through the process of heating our homes. I was having a conversation with an elderly couple in Elkhorn the other day talking about the cost to heat their home. The energy policies purported by Randy Bryce would dramatically increase your energy costs. We can protect the environment. In particular, we need to bring India and China to the table for what they're doing for the environmental degradation on a global scale.
Mr. Bryce?
As far as costs go, we have plenty of sunlight for free. And I'm an advocate of switching. Obviously, climate change is real. We need to look no further than the flooding in Madison, the hurricane that hit Puerto Rico. They still don't have electricity in some places. But I'm an advocate of making ourselves dependent on non-fossil fuel. We need to use renewable energies, and we can do it by the year 2035. It's something that I've proposed that we do, and get the building trades, which I've been a member of for the past 20 years, to start putting these things up. We wrote the book on how to put wind turbines up. Ironworkers are doing fantastic things with solar panels as well. It's the right thing to do as far as creating jobs. It's the right thing to do for our children and for our children's children so that we have a cleaner planet.
Mr. Yorgan?
Well, I've been a proponent of solar energy for about 50 years, if you can believe that. And in 8th grade science class, they brought out a couple of little solar chips, and I was fascinated by that it could actually produce electricity. We know that climate change is real, and we know that human beings are, at least in part, to blame for it. And we know that there are things that we can do to mitigate that. Why don't we do them? I don't think the argument should be whether we are responsible or not responsible. I think the discussion should be there are things we can do and we ought to do them. There are certain forms of architecture, for example, that would be fantastic, which are almost never used. Straw bale housing, if you would believe that. Yes. There's all kinds of things that can be done to bring this a little bit closer to under control. I don't think we'll ever really get it totally under control because we're going to be here for a while and we're going to continue to contribute to the problem, but let's get it reduced. Let's do what we can to save this planet.
I'll just ask the audience, if you wouldn't mind, please hold applause until the end. We've got a lot of questions to get through and want to make sure that we can do so and give every moment possible to our candidates.
Thank you. This question starts with Mr. Bryce. In the United States, education is still the doorway to opportunity. Many students today must choose between not going to college or taking out loans that would be crippling to repay. Today, outstanding student loan debt totals nearly $1.4 trillion, and the number of students who graduate with more than $50,000 in debt has more than tripled since 2000. Is higher education for all a value that you believe in? If so, what is the best way to support our students as they seek a degree in higher education? And what concrete revisions to the current system of grants and loans should be carried out so that students can achieve their degrees without excessive debt when they graduate?
$1.4 trillion is an awful lot of money to be in debt. Imagine if that money was being used in our economy, helping buy things that would help stimulate the economy and create more jobs. I've been in favor of public education, technical colleges for free for people. It's a crisis. I mean, people go to school and they get into debt. It's the one loan that you can't discharge in a bankruptcy, and you also can't renegotiate it like you can a car or a house. I'm fully in favor of being allowed to right now to be able to renegotiate these loans because a higher education shouldn't be a reason to be in debt for your entire life.
Mr. Yorgan?
Those are good points. I think that we should also incorporate free tuition in state universities and colleges for students who maintain a sufficient grade point average. And I also would like to see an expansion of trades education and vocational education. These are things that kind of passed by the wayside in my generation. Everybody was going to college, and we've got more sociologists and professors of this, that, and the other thing frying hamburgers than we need to think about. But there's a need in the skilled trades, and there's a need in some of those other areas where people actually work with their hands and do creative things. So we need to expand that. I also like the idea of restructuring loans, and I think the idea of possibly giving tax credits for the amount of money that you're paying back in your student loan would be a very helpful thing to consider. Thank you.
Mr. Steil?
I serve on the University of Wisconsin Board of Regents. I was appointed by Governor Walker and confirmed unanimously in the state Senate, Democrats and Republicans alike, because I think I bring a problem-solving approach to the cost of higher education. What do we do on the University of Wisconsin Board of Regents? For the past 6 years and my entire tenure for the past 2.5 years, we've frozen tuition. That's a real approach. It has a real impact on people's ability to afford the college product that's in front of them. Of all the states where you see student debt going up, Wisconsin's one of the very few, for the first time, you even saw it tick down. The right approach is to go and address the real problem, which is the underlying cost of the educational product. As it relates directly to your question for individuals who come from lesser means, If you take if you have a student from your family and you make less than the median wage in the state of Wisconsin, $56,000, and you get accepted to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, what is your tuition and fees? 0. That's the Badger Promise, a combination of the state, the federal government, and private donors making sure that education is affordable and accessible to students who need it most.
Thank you. Mr. Yorgan will start the next set of questions. Since 2010, unemployment has consistently fallen from near 10% down to 3.7% in September, the lowest it's been since 1969. The economy has seen solid job growth, but wage growth has lagged. Those who have seen an increase in wages occupy the top 10% of earners. Since 2000, the top 10% of earners have seen a 15.7% wage increase, nearly 5 times that of the bottom tenth. Moreover, while there are several different indicators we could look at, on average, women are still making less than men today. How should we deal with this wage stagnation and the general inequality of the haves and the have-nots, as well as improve the economic status of women and their earning power so that female students in the audience today can expect better pay equity in the future?
Well, it's economic policies that have allowed this situation to occur, and I don't like to enforce big government on people, but I'll tell you what, it's a change in economic policy that is going to cause this problem to go away, or at least to reduce it. I believe in a living wage for anybody who works 40 hours a week productively. They should be able to feed, clothe, and house themselves and be able to access health care whenever they need it. That's not happening right now. That needs to change. As far as women are concerned, I believe in equal pay for equal work. And I noticed that the subject of abortion was not on the questions that we were being asked, but I'll tell you what, I think there are a lot of women who would not make that choice if they had an economic base from which they could make that decision. So I'm all in favor of equal pay for equal work.
Thank you. Mr. Steil.
What we're starting to see in Wisconsin, as noted, is we're seeing a tight employment market. That's a positive step, and it's a positive step because employers are competing for the best and the brightest amongst us. What we're starting to see is the very beginning of wage increases. We've put in place policies at a federal level. We have tax reform. We've reduced the regulatory burden. And the direct impact of that is the job growth that's occurring right here in our communities. We're seeing in Kenosha in particular, along that I-94 corridor from the airport to the state line. We're seeing new businesses coming here, whether that's Foxconn or Herringbow, and we're seeing businesses that have been here for generations starting to continue to expand. As they go and begin that hiring process, what we're starting to see is the very beginning of wage growth. We need to continue the economic policies that have been put in place that have made these job increases such that they will lead to a continued an improvement in the wage increase.
Thank you. Mr. Bryce.
The unemployment rate is one thing to look at, but when people aren't making what they need with one job, when you're working 40 hours a week and you can't make it, you need 2 or 3 jobs, the unemployment rate is going to be down quite a bit. Governor Walker and the Republicans passed a bill a few years ago that make it much more difficult for women to get equal pay. And that's not acceptable. We need to have women, as an iron worker, we have women on a job. There's a group called Sisters of the Iron that their goal is to help bring more women into our trade because it's a predominantly male-orientated field of work. They're not getting paid the same, but they work just as hard as we do. And so that's one of the things I'm glad about being in a union. It's especially worse among women of color. So if we're going to talk about equality, we need to bring those up that are suffering the most. I'm all in favor of Equal Rights Amendment and making sure that women are paid exactly the same thing that men make.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question, starting with Mr. Steil. On November 6th, voters in 16 counties and 2 cities in Wisconsin will have the opportunity to weigh in on the national debate surrounding legalizing medical marijuana. Would you support legislation to legalize medical marijuana? Why or why not?
It's a great question. I think there may be opportunities for the doctors and the scientists and the FDA in particular to explore THC. But you see in Wisconsin we have CBD oil that's available for sale now legally. But I look in particular at the experiment on medical marijuana where it's drifted into effectively recreational marijuana. And I think there's a real risk that that marijuana will travel into our high schools and be dangerous for our high schools. I spent time with the law enforcement community here in Kenosha discussing drug trafficking that's coming through our communities, in large part traveling from Chicago up to Milwaukee and branching out in our communities. We're seeing Kenosha, Franklin, Oak Creek, and I think there's a real risk where medical marijuana travels into and becomes recreational marijuana, and I think that's a danger in particular for our high school students.
Mr. Bryce?
I'm absolutely 100% in favor of medicinal marijuana, recreational as well. And the reason that comes to mind is, although I'm a cancer survivor, I had an uncle who wasn't so lucky. He was diagnosed with lung cancer and ended up dying as a result. The side effects of what he had, it was horrible. I mean, he had no appetite and he was going through a lot of pain. We even discussed taking him to Michigan to look to a doctor to see if he could get written some kind of script. But the fact is, if we look at what's happening in Colorado, the amount of jobs that it's bringing, we're looking at it in Wisconsin. If we would be brought here, we're looking at the possibility of 300,000 jobs in addition to taxable revenue. Colorado is able to buy things, pay for things with that money that Wisconsin is not, because we're letting it go by. Canada, the entire country, has legalized it. It's about time for Wisconsin to get on board, or we're going to be left behind and wondering how come everybody else is doing so well, why not us?
Mr. Yorgan?
Well, I not only approve of medical marijuana, I think it's time to repeal the prohibition on cannabis entirely. It's a law that was founded in racism, and it was perpetrated and carried on economically by economic interests that didn't want to compete with hemp. Hemp is very much the same plant as marijuana. They're a different strain, but it's the same plant. Hemp has been used throughout history for the fiber, for the pulp, for the seed oils, for all kinds of things. Construction, it makes the best paper on the planet. You get like 30 times the paper out of an acre of land that you do out of a forest. So we need to end that, because it's had a terrible impact on our population. Those people who casually use marijuana and get arrested for it and incarcerated, they don't belong in jail. I mean, this is like a pre-crime crime. It's like, you're going to become a criminal if you smoke marijuana, so we're going to arrest you before you become a criminal. It's abhorrent and it needs to come to an end.
Thank you.
Okay, this question will also start with Mr. Bryce. The United States incarcerates more people than any other nation in the world, as 2.3 million people sit in jail and prison today. Mass incarceration is also a racial justice issue, as Black people are incarcerated at a rate 5 times higher than white citizens, and Latinos at a rate twice that of white citizens. In light of this, voters by wide margins favor major changes to our criminal justice system. Do you support criminal justice reform? What changes could be made to reform our criminal justice system and reduce our massive prison population?
We have two systems right now. I'm definitely in favor of criminal justice reform. We have a system for rich people whereby somebody can turn themselves in during the day, write a check for $1 million, they're out by night. Somebody else, like the rest of us, we don't have that we can't do that. We need to do things, I mean, in talking about incarceration, for African American males in southeast Wisconsin, it's the highest. It's double here compared to every other state in the country. Not only that, but just up the street in Racine, 4th worst place to raise an African American. That's unacceptable. We need to have a system, one system, that's just for everybody. And we can do that by banning the box to make sure that people can get employed once they serve their time. People coming out of, when they're doing their time, they're not coming out of jail in a better place than they were before. We also need to get rid of mandatory minimum sentences, whereby the judge's hands are tied and we can't find some other alternative whereby somebody could stay at home.
Thank you. Mr. Yorgan?
What you can refer to me as doctor, that's okay. The criminal justice system is replete with fallibility. I mean, it's in a bad condition. That's evidenced by the existence of the Innocence Project, which focuses on cases which could be impacted by DNA evidence. And they found a lot of people who have been convicted, and they should not have been. And that's only the DNA evidence cases that are involved. Southeast Wisconsin has the highest incarceration rate of African American males between the ages of 18 and 35 in the entire United States. The United States has a higher number and a greater percentage of its citizens incarcerated than any country in the world, including those that are considered repressive. That's terrible. We really need to overhaul our criminal justice system, and part of the problem is, I'm running out of time, but we'll get back to it.
Mr. Steil.
I think it's a great question. I think in large part the question is, how do we lower the recidivism rate? How do we prevent people who've paid their time to society to not re-enter that system again? When we have an environment where we have such a strong jobs environment, I think there's a real opportunity to make sure that criminals who paid their time, in particular nonviolent criminals, we make sure that those individuals have the job skills training that they need so they can re-enter the workforce. I think you can pair that up with a private sector approach, where right now we have such a tight labor market. We have a lot of employers that are looking for new opportunities. I think what we have an opportunity to do is to pair up that workforce need with a lot of individuals who are exiting the criminal justice system. I think that's a real opportunity to bring folks together from both the left and the right to approach that problem.
Thank you.
Whoever wins this seat in November will have to deal with issues of immigration, migration of refugees seeking asylum, undocumented workers, and young people who are currently protected by the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals Program, or DACA. How do you propose that we deal with immigration policy in this country, and what do we do with immigrants who may have been brought here as young children? Dr. Yorgan.
Well, I think the DACA program is just about to expire, so that's not a great concern of mine. As far as immigration is concerned, I believe that we should bring in as many as we can handle. I don't want to flood the country with immigrants, obviously, but I think there is room for more. If you look back on the tradition of the United States, immigrants have really built this country. They bring an energy and a hope and an enthusiasm to the social context. Up in Racine, which was a very, very strong industrial powerhouse, which has lost a lot of its manufacturing capability, we've got a neighborhood where a lot of Hispanics are living now and raising children and running jobs. I mean, they've got restaurants and tire repair shops, so on and so forth. I say that's one of the things that we could do to rejuvenate these cities that are in economic stress, is bring immigrants in. The infrastructure there would be available to them at a low cost, and just let those creative talents bloom.
Mr. Steil.
We have a broken immigration system. I think we've been let down by Democrats and Republicans alike. I think it's a multi-stepped approach. I think step one, we need to make sure we secure the border. I think the wall is a component to that. As it relates to individuals like DACA, individuals who've come here through no fault of their own, I think we need to make sure there's a path for those individuals to come right with the law. And then we also need to address our legal immigration structure. Our legal immigration structure, I think, fails to take into account our workforce needs here in the United States. So step one, you need to secure the border. You can have a path for individuals to come right with the law in the DACA situation. And then you need to fix the legal immigration structure. I look in particular, you have conversations, there's two individuals, Mike and Hector. They own a restaurant in Rock County. They fled Albania under communist rule and risked their lives to cross the border and sought asylum in the United States. We need to make sure we have a legal immigration system that properly takes individuals into account and allows them to be really solid, constructive members of our society.
Thank you. Mr. Bryce.
I have to say, I think that wall is a silly idea, spending tens of billions of dollars for a wall that can be defeated with a $40 stepladder. Right now, immigration, are you kidding me? Donald Trump is putting kids in cages, in dog cages. That's unacceptable. This country is built on the backs of immigrants. One of the first things that I remember after the presidential election was getting a call from Voces de la Frontera. They were terrified of Donald Trump talking about, well, they're not sending their best up here. There's rapists and murderers. Never mind the fact that he's given white supremacists in Charlottesville a full pass. But when it comes to people that are trying to get here seeking asylum, he's turning them away. People coming from Honduras. I spent time in Honduras when I was in the Army. That place now is the most dangerous place in the world. When we have people coming up trying to seek refuge, and they're not welcome in the United States, This country is turning into something that it never was meant to be. It surely is not the reason I put on a uniform. We need to turn back, and these people need a clean DREAM Act. We need a clean DAPA Act, too, so their parents can stay. It's about keeping families together.
We are hearing leaders in Congress talk about reforming Social Security and Medicare to get the federal budget under control. Talking specifically about Social Security, which American workers are paying into, how would you work to keep it fully funded and paying out for the foreseeable future for all the people in this room? Mr. Steil.
It's a terrific question. So Social Security is a promise we made to our seniors, and it's a promise we need to keep. The same goes for Medicare. Both are promises that we made to seniors. The promise needs to be made kept for, in particular, individuals in retirement and those approaching retirement age. As you get to a younger group, my generation and below, we need to have a conversation across the aisle to determine how we can properly maintain that program so it lasts for generations to come. I look back and I think of my grandfather. He started working at Wrigley's Gum in 1939, left for World War II, came back, Wrigley's held his job open. He retired on his 65th birthday, 1983. My grandma, living on the north side of Chicago, she still lives on that Wrigley's pension along with Social Security. Social Security is a promise we made to our seniors. It's a promise we need to keep, in particular for those in retirement and those approaching retirement age.
Mr. Bryce.
When you hear Bryan talk about, let's have a discussion, trust me, he means we're going to cut it. As far as Social Security, I think we'd be in a much better place if we didn't give $1.5 trillion to billionaires, to the wealthiest people in this country, as part of the tax scam. 1 week later, we heard Paul Ryan say, well, all of a sudden we can't afford it. I don't know why we don't have any money. Just recently, we heard Mitch McConnell. It's the Republican plan to make cuts. They came right out and I don't normally hear them this boldly claim some things, but they said we're going to make cuts to it. That's unacceptable. These are earned benefits. They're treating it like the government is giving us some kind of privilege. These are things that we paid into our entire lives. It's something that people are deserving of. So many people, especially the elderly, depend on it as their only means of income because not a lot of people have pensions. It's something that should be protected. It's something that also should be expanded because people need it. It should be there when they're ready for it.
Dr. Yorgan.
One thing that people seem to forget is that Medicare is part of the Social Security Trust Program. The money for Medicare is drawn out of that trust. What we really need to do in this country is get rid of the concept of insurance altogether. We should reform health care financing. We should get rid of insurance. It's an old concept and it no longer serves its purpose. If we break Medicare away from Social Security and we use Medicare as the model for everybody in the country to be a part of, we could have a tremendous savings. That would keep Social Security alive for much longer. Also, if we go to a sales tax to support the healthcare system, and it would be approximately, by my calculations, about a 15% sales tax, which causes people to gasp, except for the fact that it would be on non-essential purchases. Now, in order to pay $150 in tax on a monthly basis, you'd have to buy $1,000 worth of non-essential items. And we're out of time. Okay.
Mr. Bryce, the Me Too movement has sparked public conversations nationwide about the varied experiences and prevalence of sexual harassment and assault. As important as it is for women to have a platform through which to share their stories, social media will only get us so far. How do you plan to protect victims of sexual assault and prevent future instances of sexual assault and harassment?
Well, first of all, I'd like to commend the women that are coming forward and sharing their stories. They're horrible, and they shouldn't happen. And as a man, I'm going to listen to what they have to say and do whatever I can to stop this from happening. Our campaign staff, we unionized. It's the first campaign staff to do so in American political history. One of the things that we made that's so important because of the time is sexual harassment, so that we have a third party. People can reach out to the third party if it becomes an issue. We have a one-strike rule. It's something that's not going to be tolerated by anybody on our staff. Women deserve better than this, and as men, we need to not just listen, but pay attention and help them, which is why I'm proud to do more than just talk about it, but listen to the stories, and again, put in place policies that are going to help women, and also be the guy that tells the other men, listen, we talk enough. Let's pay attention and do what we can to help women.
Thank you. Dr. Yorgan.
Well, sexual harassment is a problem with the power dynamic being out of balance in any kind of a social interaction, and it's the person with more power that's taking advantage of the person with less. People would be surprised to learn just how many people other than women are victims of sexual harassment. I don't think there's anything worse that a person can experience emotionally than to be feeling abused, unprotected, and unbelieved. It's a very, very lonely existence to have to lead. I think it's incumbent upon men who are the physically stronger in the group to be protective of those who are not as strong. That includes women, it includes children, it includes anybody who would be vulnerable to sexual harassment. I think it's important to hold people accountable for sexual harassment, but it's just as important to educate them out of their behavior.
Thank you. Mr. Steil.
There's no place in our society for sexual harassment or sexual assault. In particular, no individual, man or woman, should feel uncomfortable going into work because of sexual harassment or sexual assault. I'll make a promise that if elected, in my office, there will be a zero tolerance policy as it relates to sexual harassment and sexual assault. In my background, I've taken action on this. In the University of Wisconsin Board of Regents, we put in place policies to stop what we call pass the trash. What happens often is in background checks and references, people don't bring up appropriately when an individual has been accused or convicted of sexual harassment or sexual assault. We put in place policies to identify individuals who've been charged with those actions to make sure that they do not receive a job at another institution, so you don't pass the trash. We've taken action. There's no room in our society for sexual assault and sexual harassment.
Thank you.
Please. Currently, 11.8 million Americans have insurance through the Affordable Care Act, but around 15.5% are still uninsured. That's up 2.8% from 2016. Moreover, the most recent Kaiser Health Tracking poll continues to find the public more favorable than unfavorable in their views of the ACA. A March Kaiser Health poll found that 59% of Americans favor a Medicare for All plan, including about a third of Republicans polled. With the current cost of health care, what type of affordable health care system do you support in the United States? Dr. Yorgan.
Well, as I mentioned in the previous question, I support replacing insurance entirely with a health care financing plan, which makes health care available to everyone. You don't need health insurance, you need health care. And if we eliminate a lot of the overhead that's involved in traditional insurance plans, there'd be a tremendous saving. In 2015, just 70 CEOs for insurance companies took home $20 billion for 70 people. That's an incredible amount of money to go to that small number of people. Oh, I tell you, Medicare itself, the model for Medicare functions on about a 1 to 2%, typically 1%, sometimes less than that, administrative cost overhead. Traditional insurance sometimes trades straight as high as 40%. The Affordable Care Act capped it at 25%. Now, there are people who claim to be conservatives who say this is a government takeover of health care. It's not. It's the people's response to a corporate takeover of health care. And if you believe in government of, by, and for the people, it's the people's response.
Mr. Steil.
The Affordable Care Act has failed us. What it's done is it's driven up the cost of health care. And as we've done that, we've made that health care less affordable and less accessible. Now, I've been clear since the beginning, we need to protect people we need to protect individuals with pre-existing conditions. We can do that while still addressing the disaster that is Obamacare. What we need to do is put patients and doctors at the center of the decision-making process to lower costs and improve quality. In particular, you can look towards HSAs and other options to find how you put those individuals and doctors at the center of that decision-making process. I think this stands in stark contrast to Randy Bryce, who would support a government takeover of health care that effectively end Medicare as we know it. It would jeopardize the Medicare program that we have for seniors, And in particular, it would dramatically increase costs. Just to pay for that program alone, you'd have to double all income and business taxes just to pay for that one program. We need to stay focused on how do you lower costs and improve quality.
Mr. Bryce.
You want to know how a Republican's running for office? After voting to repeal Obamacare, the ACA, they're now promising that if you elect them again, they're going to save pre-existing conditions. As a cancer survivor, this is the number one issue for me. I was diagnosed with cancer at a time when I'm working 2 full-time jobs and didn't have any access to insurance. That's a scary place. My mom has MS. My dad has Alzheimer's. It's something that affects everybody. I've been in favor of a Medicare for All system. Koch brothers have done a study that shows we're actually save $2 trillion over 10 years by putting it in place. In addition, that's going to mean we'll be able to have access to dental and eye care as well. We're not going to have, healthy people have to pay more and more every year on your premiums or your deductibles, even if you don't use it. That's unacceptable. People shouldn't have to make life or death decisions just because they can't afford access to a doctor.
Thank you.
Had you been in Congress this last session, would you have voted for the 2018 tax reform bill? Why or why not? And if you are elected, would you support another round of tax reform? Start with Mr. Steil.
I think the tax reform bill that went through is a great step forward. I think it puts more money in the pocketbooks of people here in southeast Wisconsin. I think that stands in stark contrast with Randy Bryce. Randy Bryce would raise your taxes. I think that you're better off having more of your hard-earned money right here in southeast Wisconsin. In particular, you look at some of the other tax reforms, it's encouraged investment right here in southeast Wisconsin. We see businesses coming in here and investing. Why is that important? It's important because they're out hiring individuals, and as we have more competition in the labor market, we're beginning to drive wages higher. What we need to do is put a lot of those policies so that they're permanently in place, so that your tax does not go up, that you can keep more of your hard-earned money in your pocketbook right here in southeast Wisconsin.
Mr. Bryce.
I don't want to raise hardworking people in the middle class's taxes. I want to raise millionaires' taxes, corporate lawyers who get paid to outsource jobs.
Please.
This last tax scam was ridiculous. 83% of all the benefits went to the very top 1%. Unacceptable. They're squeezing the middle class. You want to talk about wealth redistribution? It's happening right now. But it's from the middle class going upwards. That's unacceptable. People work too hard. We're more productive, numbers prove that, but our wages have been stagnant. The price of everything else is going up. So I don't know how we can expect to get by when we continue to squeeze the middle class, who's already doing everything to work, to maintain, and build what we have. Let's give the middle class a break. And the Democrats are the ones that are talking about tax cuts that actually benefit the hardworking people of the middle class.
Dr. Yorgan.
I definitely would not have voted for that tax package that came through. It was a big, wet, sloppy kiss for the big boys at the top and a little peck on the cheek for the middle class. Not only that, but they're going to come and wipe your cheek over the next 10 years, so there's no evidence of that little kiss. The tax structure needs to be redone. I mean, and those tax cuts for the big boys, those were permanent. Of course, we know nothing's permanent, so if you send me to Congress, I'll talk about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Bryce, according to a CNN poll, the school shooting in Parkland, Florida, has shifted public opinion on gun laws. Overall, 70% of those polled now say they back gun reform. How do you address the issue of gun reform to deal with what feels like an epidemic of mass shootings?
Well, it's obvious that what we have now isn't working, what we have in place now. As the father of a son that's in middle school at a public school, every time I hear about these school massacres, and there seems to be one every other week, I'm just terrified that someday it's going to happen to my son. I refuse to buy him a bulletproof backpack for him to carry his books back and forth to school. What we need is sensible gun reform. We just had 2 fathers whose children were killed in the Parkland shooting come up. One draws murals on a wall. He did that for us, and he was talking about, we didn't think it would happen in Parkland. We thought that our community was safe. That's the reason he moved there. was he checked it out. It was a safe community. His child is dead as a result of this, and all we're offered is thoughts and prayers. Thoughts and prayers aren't going to solve anything. We need common sense gun reform. Get rid of bump stocks. I heard that was something everybody pretty much agreed upon we don't need. Where is it? It's been ignored until the next shooting, and then we'll be offered more thoughts and prayers. We also need background checks so that we know that people who have access to guns don't have something in their background that would harm the community.
Thank you. Dr. Yorgan.
Well, now is the time that we should be talking about this gun issue and about violence in the schools and in public places. There's a little bit of a lull, and this is typically the time when everybody just forgets about it until the next big shooting comes along. One of the major problems, one of the major factors in these gun massacres is mental health issues. And if we had a working healthcare finance system, mental health services would be available to people who need it. They should not be able to buy guns or get a hold of guns. Now, I've talked to a lot of gun owners. I own a couple of guns myself. And I'll tell you, if they would enforce the gun laws that are currently on the books, it would be a great step toward reducing the possession and the misuse of guns. As far as high-capacity, rapid-fire weapons are concerned, when they were banned under the Clinton administration, there was a perceivable good effect. That has been repealed. That's unfortunate. I think that needs to be reopened.
Thank you. Mr. Steil.
The school shootings we see is a really serious issue. I think first and foremost what we need to do is enforce the gun laws that are on the books. If you look at Chicago, roughly 1 in 20 shootings leads to an arrest. That's abysmal. We need to make sure that our law enforcement community has the resources they need to be able to put criminals who use guns illegally behind bars. The other thing I hear when I speak to the law enforcement community is the tone with which we speak to these law enforcement officers. They're often the first ones on the scene. You think about the men and women who arrived at Middleton just a few weeks ago and went in and prevented a situation from becoming much worse. We owe them a deep debt of gratitude. I think that stands in stark contrast. Randy Bryce has compared law enforcement officers to terrorists. Your words, not mine. I've challenged you before and I ask you tonight. I think you should apologize to the men and women of the law enforcement community for comparing them to terrorists.
We just...
Thank you.
We don't have rebuttals, correct?
Sorry?
No rebuttals?
Not tonight.
Okay.
This is our final question for the evening. Depending upon how one counts, we've spent somewhere between $1.5 to $5.6 trillion in our war efforts in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. Given that the U.S. government says that these wars are being fought in support of our national interest, would you support a tax to pay for our current military efforts in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, and retroactively to pay for our wars in Afghanistan and Iraq? Related to this, as a congressman, you may be called to vote on putting troops in harm's way. Under what conditions do you believe we should commit troops to roles abroad? Mr. Yorgan, Dr. Yorgan.
Well, I don't think there is anything more honorable that a man or a woman can do than to place themselves in harm's way in defense of their family, their home, and their country. But it's incumbent upon the leaders who deploy them to only do so in case of an emergency, in case of an extreme national need, and I think that's where our leadership has fallen down. The situation now exists where basically the president can declare war just about any time he wants to, as long as he gives Congress notice within 48 hours and asks them for approval. Well, the troops are already out there. What are they going to say? Bring them back in? That power needs to be taken away from the president and placed more firmly in the hands of the Congress. I don't think we should deploy troops unless there is a definite national threat. And we've got 800 bases in 172 countries around the world. I don't understand what is going on. Why are we the policemen of the world? This just makes no sense. I don't support additional taxation for additional deployments.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Steil.
One of the most challenging votes you could take as a member of the House of Representatives would be to send men and women into harm's way. To do that, you need to know that all diplomatic solutions that can reasonably sought have been sought, and there's no further option. You also need to know there's a clear path to success for that operation, and you need to know that our national security is utmost and at stake. As it relates to the budgetary issue, I think Washington has a taxing problem, has a spending problem, not a taxing problem. I think we need to address our overall spending in Washington, but in particular, I think the proper funding was put in place in the most recent budget after the military had been hollowed out under the Obama administration, supported by Nancy Pelosi. We finally have a budget that came in and properly funded our military so we can negotiate from a position of strength, so we can negotiate peaceful resolutions from a position of strength, in particular as it relates to Iran and North Korea.
Mr. Bryce.
I'm a veteran myself. I was deployed to Central America in the mid-'80s when we had some things going on down there. And I know how important it is to feel like the country has your back, that you have everything you need. That being said, when it comes to voting to send people to war, Paul Ryan removed Barbara Lee's amendment in the middle of the night. It was literally right around midnight. That ended up it would have taken away Donald Trump's blank check to wage war on us. I think it needs to be put back in the hands of Congress. It shouldn't be one man, especially with some of the activities that I've seen him doing and some of the things he says. I don't want to have our soldiers sent to war as a result of some tweet that he makes up. But we've seen he'll pull away an agreement that we have with Iran and rip it up and say it's not good, but he'll go to North Korea and try to get the same kind of thing passed. Well, how much credibility do we have these days? Literally, not too long ago, he was talking in front of the United Nations, and the rest of the world laughed at us. We need a strong foreign policy. We need to make sure when we send troops someplace, we have an excuse. When we bring them back, there has to be a definite victory plan. We don't have that in Afghanistan right now, and our troops deserve it. And when they come back, we need to take care of them. If we can spend millions to send them and equip us for war, we need to take care of them when they come back and restart back into society.
Gentlemen, we've reached our closing remarks. We'll begin with Mr. Steil.
Thank you. And thank you to Carthage College and to the members of the audience for being here tonight and to those listening and watching at home. I think what we heard tonight is a great contrast in ideas, a contrast in the direction that we want to take our country. I think that's a good conversation to have. I believe we need to lower the cost of health care. We need to put patients and doctors at the center of the decision-making process. I think that stands in stark contrast to Randy Bryce, who wants a government takeover of health care, would end Medicare as we know it. I believe you should have more of your money in your heart, in your pocketbook, right here in southeast Wisconsin. I think that's in stark contrast to Randy Bryce, who would raise your taxes. I believe we need to keep our communities safe. I think that's why I earned the endorsement of all 6 sheriffs, Democrats and Republicans alike, across the entire 1st Congressional District. I think that stands in stark contrast to Randy Bryce, who would abolish ICE, policies that would make our communities less safe. I think what we heard tonight is a contrast in ideas. Is the answer to our struggles reside in Washington, D.C., or is it here in our home communities, in Kenosha, Racine, Franklin, Oak Creek, Elkhorn, Janesville, and everywhere in between? I believe it's the latter. At the end of this election, in 2 weeks from today, you'll have a choice. And as an American democracy, one of the most important things you can do is vote. And on November 6th, I humbly ask for your vote, because we can't afford to take a step back to the failed economic policies of the past. Together, we must continue to move our economy forward.
Mr. Bryce.
Well, I want to thank the moderators, thank Carthage College, thank all the people that are here tonight. It's not nice to have to compete against the Brewers game. And it comes down to a simple thing. You know, you can have somebody that understands what it's like to struggle, to work hard and struggle in the 1st District, survive cancer, have a son, and a veteran. Somebody that knows what it's like to get laid off in the middle of wintertime and wonder where your next paycheck is going to come from. Or we can vote for a corporate attorney who has made money outsourcing good-paying Wisconsin jobs to China or Mexico. What we need is a government for the many, not for the few. I plan on standing up, listening, and then standing up for the hardworking people of Wisconsin's 1st District, because for the last 20 years, we've been ignored.
Please. Dr. Yorgan.
Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us here this evening. It's been a pleasure to talk with you and discuss these issues with the other 2 candidates. I heard a reference to the failed policies of the past, and I would like to say that this trickle-down theory of economics that we've been involved in for the last 40 years has been a dismal failure, and it's time to abandon that. Talk about a confiscatory policy for the redistribution of wealth. That's what's taking place when you give too much power to the corporations and the people that have too much money already. I don't think I have ever read a child-rearing book that says, give the child everything they want, plus a little more. But that's what we're doing with the wealthiest members of our community. We're giving them everything they want, plus a little bit more. Is it any wonder that they don't want anything to change? My goodness, when Bryan's former employer, Mr. Ryan, was in office, the wealthy got wealthier by a substantial margin, and things were put into place to keep them that way. I think it's time to reverse some of those trends.
Gentlemen, thank you. We'll have closing remarks from President John Swallow.
I want to thank our candidates, Bryce, Steil, and Yorgan, and remind everyone that there is an election day coming up. If you live in Ward 3 of Kenosha, then Carthage College is a polling place, and I will encourage you to come to the Tarble Athletic and Recreation Center between 7 in the morning and 8 p.m., where you can exercise your right to vote. I want to thank the Kenosha News, the Journal-Times of Racine, and the Lake Geneva Regional News for helping us sponsor this program. And I want to thank each of our moderators for asking very careful and well-delivered questions to our candidates. I hope that many of you will stay here tonight to talk to the candidates, and that many of you will come back to Carthage for another event in the future. So let's take this moment to thank our candidates for being here and sharing with us.